Does anybody here know why there's no Chinatown in San Diego? The second largest city in the west coast of North America, no Chinatown? If you don't know why already, hopefully by the end of this presentation you will. Good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Anderson. My pronouns are he, him. I am the Secretary of the Education Committee of the San Diego chapter of Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm here to talk about the biggest free speech fight in American history that happened right here in San Diego 111 years ago, and how the fight is still going on today. What is a free speech fight exactly? Well, a free speech fight is a direct action tactic to gain awareness for labor issues by organizing workers and urging them to use their collective voice. The International Workers of the World, commonly known as the Wobblies, since 1905, used the tactic to spread the message, workers of the world unite, and one big union, to mobilize all the different trade and craft unions against capitalist oppression. Across the country, in big and small ways, the Wobblies went to workplaces, union halls, and even set up soapboxes on street corners if they had to, so that they could protect the rights of the working class. They would pick a fight with the bosses and local prominent businessmen who would use their influence over the police and the local government to pass local ordinances banning free speech because of the agitators. Ideally, through civil disobedience, the ordinance would be defeated and the union message would win the day. Free speech ordinances were passed in Spokane, Washington, Missoula, Montana, and Sioux City, Iowa. These notable free speech fights were generally considered successful. Not so in San Diego. Our fight became the stuff that songs were made of. We're Bound for San Diego is an IWW song out of the Big Red Songbook. The version we heard at the beginning of tonight's session was performed in 2012 by the Proles at the Free Speech Centennial at San Diego City College. If it takes 100 years. As you can see from the lyrics, it's definitely not a victory song. In San Diego, an entire neighborhood was flattened. Chinatown was destroyed. Atrocities occurred. Some might call it genocide. I do. So here's what happened. In November 1910, at a Wobbly meeting called Germania Hall, the IWW Local 13 were holding an event to commemorate the martyrs of the Haymarket Affair when the San Diego police raided the building and prevented the assembly. The Haymarket riot was a pivotal event in American labor history. It happened in Chicago in 1886. An unknown person threw dynamite at a union rally, striking for an 8-hour day. Between the bombing and the ensuing gunfight with police, 12 people were killed, including 7 police officers. 8 anarchists were rounded up and convicted of conspiracy, and 5 were sentenced to death. Only 2 of the convicted were even there. Battles like this preserve rights that workers continue to enjoy today, but it was a state lynching. Meanwhile, back in 1910, because the police shut down Germania Hall before their solemn ceremony could take place, the Wobblies took their righteous anger to the streets in the nearby neighborhood once called Stingaree, where the gas lamp district is now. Many of those who spoke on the soapbox were arrested, and that was over a year before the free speech ordinance was to be passed. Stingaree was a poor neighborhood. There was a Chinatown and a red light district. Visiting sailors would go to Stingaree for entertainment, and the working class was just trying to live there. At the corner of 5th and E was Soapbox Row. Perhaps due to its proximity to City Hall, anyone who had a message to spread and did not have social media or control of their own personal newspaper were able to speak directly to the public at Soapbox Row. In wealthier parts, the city was run by the billionaire class. Maybe the most powerful booster at the time was John D. Spreckles. He had a funny name, and that wasn't all he got from his daddy. He and his brother Adolf inherited so much wealth, they owned most of downtown and all of Coronado Island. When a publisher disagreed with him, Spreckles bought the San Diego Union newspaper and turned it into the most powerful newspaper in the city, which continues even today. Spreckles had plans for the upcoming Panama, California exhibition, a World's Fair type event scheduled for 1915, and the labor unions were not going to get in his way. Incidentally, many opulent building facades in Balboa Park, built for the Panama, California exhibition, were used in the 1939 Orson Welles movie, Citizen Kane, to portray the mad billionaire newspaper oligarch Charles Foster Kane's obscenely opulent Xanadu mansion. Let's go to the videotape. We're looking for Balboa Park. This is where the Prado restaurant is in Balboa Park. We think this is Balboa Park. That right here is the California Tower. And it's all meant to be exterior shots to portray Charles Kane's, the mad billionaire's opulent mansion. And it says in Florida, but I think there's other exterior shots as well. This El Cid statue is in Balboa Park. We believe that's in Balboa Park. If anybody knows where it is, let us know. And there's at least one more. We could have, I don't know if we could have left the sound on or not, but it's almost over. I wonder if this is the San Diego Zoo. I think that might be. That's the California Tower as well. And so it goes. That should be the end. Thank you, Heather. Okay, Kane was famously modeled after publisher William Randolph Hearst, but Orson Welles may as well have been talking about Spreckles, Elon Musk, or any other oligarch during any historical time period. 1 month before Germania Hall was raided in 1910, the Los Angeles Times building had been bombed during a newspaper strike. The home of its oligarch publisher, H.G. Otis, was targeted as well. Long known for anti-unionism, it was Otis, not Spreckles, who was name-checked in the Wobbly song, "We're Bound for San Diego." And if old Otis has his way, there's sure to be a mess. Unsurprisingly, it was the labor organizers who were persecuted and convicted for the LA Times bombing. The Haymarket riot and the LA Times bombing are still listed in the top 12 deadliest criminal acts in American history. And anybody who lived through 9/11, the event at the top of that list, knows that all kinds of tyranny can be justified by the pretext of a rhetorical war on terror. On January 6, 1912, an off-duty constable drove his car into a crowd of wobblies at Heller's Corner in San Diego, killing protesters, and in the ensuing melee, more police were killed. The pretext was established. The anarchists became a public enemy. Some 85 prominent citizens signed a petition, and free speech ordinance number 4623 was passed 2 days later. Supporters of all political causes, street performers, buskers, preachers, and snake oil salesmen were affected by the ban, but the targets were indeed the Wobblies. Vigilantes from the American Legion and the local police soon rounded up suspected socialists, took them to an isolated area in North County, and forced them to kiss the American flag. They were compelled to sing the Star-Spangled Banner, and if they could not, and many immigrants could not, they would be violently beaten, some made to run a gauntlet of 106 men. The free speech fight continued. In March 1912, 65-year-old wobbly Michael Hoey was beaten by 3 policemen and thrown in jail, where he died from lack of care. When this became known, the protest drew in a crowd of nearly 5,000 people who traveled to San Diego from all across the country to protest police brutality. Fire hoses were unleashed on the crowd for 4 hours. In May 1912, socialist Joseph Michaelisek was shot and killed by police, which brought the free speech fight to a head. Enter the famous anarchist Emma Goldman, who advocated for the founding of the Wobblies with her bold and flamboyant lover/manager, Dr. Ben Reitman, who would later become famous for writing a book that became a Martin Scorsese movie called Boxcar Bertha, 1973. These two came to San Diego to agitate for the free speech fight, but they didn't even get to speak at all. They were surrounded by vigilantes at Santa Fe Station and run out of town. Reitman was kidnapped and tortured. The vigilantes stuffed an American flag down his throat, burned the letters IWW into his buttocks with cigars, and abused his rectum and testicles, covered him with tar, and in lieu of feathers, took hard sagebrush from the mountains of North County and rubbed it in his wounds. Goldman and Reitman tried to come back to San Diego in 1913, but were blocked again by vigilantes. They did not finally come back until 1916, but by then, the Wobblies were crushed. The 1915 Panama, California exhibition was a great success. Balboa Park was an architectural showcase for the world, and the entire neighborhood of Stingery was gone forever. 120 buildings were razed, including all of Chinatown. A lot has happened since the events surrounding 1912, and we're still fighting the good fight. While the ban on street speaking in San Diego was rescinded in 1915, the city instituted an ordinance against seditious language in 19. Though the Federal Sedition Act of 1918 was repealed in 1920 after the end of World War I, San Diego's version was on the books until September 2020, following the Black Lives Matter protests. Tickets for violation were still being issued in 2020, mostly targeting Black people. In 2012, the San Diego City Council issued a centennial proclamation stating that this council does express its deep dismay for our predecessors' actions and formally reiterates the council's repudiation of this shameful free speech ordinance, referring to ordinance number 4623. They could formally reiterate any repudiation they want, but Occupy San Diego members sitting in the same council chambers at the time were presently still unsuccessful in their attempts to modify an ordinance prohibiting public displays that allowed the police to arrest them for peaceful picketing and organizing. What happened to the Wobblies? They remained a force in the labor movement well into the 1950s. The San Diego branch of the Wobblies, they still have a Instagram page, the largest in the country at the time, dissolved with the closing of it actually dissolved with the closing of the San Diego Street Journal in 1972, though several other businesses organized under the IWW umbrella throughout that decade. In 2012, following its centennial commemoration for the San Diego free speech fight, inspired local union activists and IWW members began holding monthly meetings and starting building a new branch that was chartered in 2017. They're still on Instagram. This very year, 2023, 59 graduate students, workers at UC San Diego who disrupted an alumni awards ceremony with peaceful protests were charged with physical assault, physical abuse, and threats to health and safety, and disruption of university activities. Nearly half of those charged claimed they weren't even there. Weeks later, 2 UCSD graduate student workers and 1 postdoc were arrested for writing slogans and washable markers in chalk on campus property, all at a public university, all to compel the university to honor their student worker contracts. The fight for free speech continues today. One of the most famous lines in movie history is, "Forget it, Jake. it's Chinatown. Well, in San Diego, it's not even Chinatown anymore. Please don't forget this story. Don't let others forget. Tell someone about it, especially if you live in San Diego. This is only an introduction. We must not forget it, Jake. San Diego should not only be remembered for Comic-Con, the zoo, or George W. Bush's aircraft carrier moment. The mission will never be accomplished. We must carry it as far into the future as possible. In that spirit, I propose that we push the city to make January 6th a permanent local holiday. That was the day that union busting police drove a car into a crowd of free speech fighters and laid waste to an entire American neighborhood so that union busting billionaires could have a big international party. If the city leaders don't listen, at least let our DSA chapter have an annual vigil or some other remembrance. Remember January 6th. Now that we've covered the free speech struggles in San Diego over the last century or so, let's open this up for a discussion. Julie will take it from here. Thank you for your time, everybody. I really appreciate this. Is Julie here?
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Eric, for a wonderful presentation.
Right.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Okay, great. So I think there's a lot of material that you went over. And so I am going to post some discussion questions in the chat. And just as the slide says, if folks could just type stack in the chat or raise your hand, and then I can just keep track of folks who want to go in the queue for questions. Feel free to ask clarification questions. I know Eric and Heather, we all did some research for this material, and it's really a lot of information. So I also want to welcome people to ask clarification questions. Okay. So I have a few questions here.
I have to make an adjustment. So I think chat is now open.
Okay.
Everyone. So we're looking for participation. Oh, there you go, Scott. Thank you, Scott. It works.
Okay, here's the first two questions. And then I have a couple more.
Would you like me to read?
Okay, sorry, it's a lot of text. Okay, so I'll just read it aloud. So the first question is a pretty broad one, but I imagine most of us are residents here. So how does what you learned tonight change or complicate your understanding of San Diego? In what way and why? For example, for myself, I had no idea there was even a Chinatown in San Diego. And that really changes my perspective of the city as an Asian American. I'm curious what y'all think. Second question, how does what you learned tonight help you think about the intersection between labor activism and free speech? The next one here, I won't read everything, you can just read on your own. But I found an interesting kind of historical context about Sparkles, who Eric mentioned, reaching out to President Taft at the height of the protests, asking basically for like military aid, and claiming that the Wobblies were just trying to set up their own government, and ignoring and kind of eliding the labor issue in that way. and then the Department of Justice told Taft there was no way to send over any military, and so then the local vigilantes took things into their own, and the estimates are roughly around 2,000. And so I wanted to ask the question, what do you make of the relationship between all the parties involved in the free speech fight at the local and federal levels, right? There's the anti-union elite of San Diego, there's the local vigilantes committing the violence, there's the federal government, right? And then there's IWW at the national level, and then the local level. And then the final question was just, what connections do you see between past and present struggles for free speech? What differences, what other examples come to mind? And I just gave a summary of the arrest of the graduate workers in July at UCSD. And then I just gave a little, the last paragraph here is about Elon Musk, right? And how he has, as the owner of X, formerly known as Twitter, the social media platform, he has suspended reporters, lefting accounts. Nobody has alleged him of violating First Amendment rights. And I found this interesting quote by a journalist reporting on this in an article called "Elon Musk's Free Speech Charade is Over. If your freedom of speech is only protected when it aligns with the ruling party, then you do not have a right to freedom of speech." Okay, so maybe just take a couple seconds. I know it's a lot of questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you can just put stack or raise your hand. Scott, would you like to say your answer?
Yeah, sure. I was going to say, this is really great presentation. Eric, I really like your voice when you're reading out stuff. I just wanted to compliment you on that. You know, it feels like an old-fashioned kind of newsreel. Those readers who did it from like World War II and everything, I thought that was just really good. Anyway, I think coming here, like from other places, I think it helps explain why I feel a little different, why San Diego feels kind of sterile to me in some fundamental way. I really didn't, you see the Spreckles organ, but you don't really realize, like, you come here, it's like, oh, it's all pretty on the outside, but it's really kind of rotten inside, and both like literally and figuratively. So they have these places that are a big facade that was built essentially at the same time that they're crushing all the really interesting people and diversity in the city and the union activists. And then it became a super militarized town. It's a border town that doesn't want anyone on the border. And it just seems like it's been ruled, and just all the time here, it's just been ruled by the people who control the newspaper, the developers, there's just been no counter to that. And so it's like it feels like this, I wonder why we don't have much of a union movement, why it's so tough to get things done. And this is very helpful in understanding that it really was crushed early, and those people, they aren't here. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Scott. I mean, that resonates so much, and it looks like other people, it resonates with them too. This city that people say it's like a paradise, but it's such a paradox. And I think it was great. We saw the relation to Balboa Park and the formation, right? Balboa Park is this like opulent center, but as you said, there is this sterile side. And I think Eric really made an effort with the voice. So Eric, I hope that felt good to hear that compliment. Okay, Kenzo.
Hi. First of all, as Scott mentioned earlier, Eric, you did an amazing job with the presentation. I am really proud of you, and I really liked the storytelling that you were doing with the presentation. So good job. Second of all, when I hear free speech, it's usually a talking point that a lot of right wingers in the United States make, especially like people in like the American Libertarian Party or like, the GOP, obviously. So it was really interesting just listening to the presentation and talking about how free speech and left-wing activism is like has a connection. And like there is a lot of debate around whether the First Amendment is like, you know, what like the existence of this amendment has been debated on, but I really do think that we should exercise this right. And we are all doing it all the time, like, with the unions and all that. So I just really thought that this perspective was really interesting, and I really hope that we take this to our advantage to do the next, to further our activism. Over.
Thanks so much, Kenzo. Connor?
Hey everybody, Connor here. Yeah, I guess was gonna respond to the first question, which is how does this change my opinion of or I guess the way I look at San Diego. And I was kind of like, after Scott talked a little bit, was kind of reminded, just kind of thinking about the timeline here, with the 1910s being really when the city started growing. And I'm kind of like almost thinking like we are basically the 1910 equivalent of Phoenix, Arizona. It was basically like the city was set up by boosters, by these oligarch families, essentially as a like, let's get away from the activism and politics of other places. So we pretty much are like the Houston, Texas, or Phoenix, Arizona of that time, where it's like the city was almost intentionally made to be just to skirt and thwart the efforts of its citizens to organize and stand up for themselves. That's kind of was the thought I had.
Yeah, thank you so much, Connor. Heather, do you think it's possible to go back to the slide with the soapbox image? Is that possible? Because I just think that's a powerful picture. Right. I guess I'm thinking about what Connor just said and what Scott said earlier about how it feels like there's not much of a counter, right? The city from its foundation was built by these oligarchs. Balboa Park is for them. The opulence is for them. It feels sterile. I've heard Bill, who I think is here, call San Diego like a ghost town, right? But then I think about these images where there's, the people are filling the streets, and there's, there were hundreds of people going to jail because they were all out in the street. And so I also think about that, right? Like maybe the people weren't able to like build infrastructure that like commemorates them, but they were there. Eric?
Oh, okay. Thank you for the compliments. I was just I sort of made a joke yesterday during the run through about that, sort of like trying to be an old newsreel. The clip, if there were sound to the Citizen Kane, was like that old type newsreel type voice. But nobody said anything yesterday, but I appreciate you saying stuff now. Going back off, I think it was Scott's comment about sort of, it feels like a facade and fake. Well, I just want to show you quickly off on my bookshelf. There's 3 books everybody knows: Under the Perfect Sun by Mike Davis, Kelly Mayhew, and Jim Miller. They reference that this is DSA people talking about this book. Is the first time I ever heard about the San Diego free speech fight. Now it was about a year ago. And this book has references 2 other books. This is a called Variations on a Theme Park, where it's a very sociological type of book about how, you know, the economy and everything's like a theme park. Everything's so fake. And there's another one called Spectacular Nature, Corporate Culture and the SeaWorld Experience by Susan something. And it's also very similar. Susan G. Davis. Susan G. Davis, not the Davis on the post office. But so add those to your watch list. And you know, it definitely, San Diego is the economy is all either service industry or the military, you know, and it's all, everything's a theme park. And it's probably been like that over 111 years. So I'll let somebody else talk now. Thank you, everybody.
We were talking about discussing Under the Perfect Sun in a book club. I think it would be great. It would be great to hear from everybody what else they want to learn about San Diego, about labor history, so we can think about, because we're, you know, brainstorming future topics for events like these. So Bill, you are next.
Yeah, I just want to provide some context, like Haymarket affair, and like in response to what Julie just said. Yeah, so like after the Haymarket affair, the city, I mean the city of Chicago set up a statue where there was this cop, they're like the pushing his hand forward sign and saying like, in the name of the people of Illinois, I command you to stop, or something, which is just so horrible that, because I mean even a lot of the politicians at that time were criticizing how they handled the affair because it was so barbaric. And then it stood there for such a long time. I think it stood there for a few decades until finally, like around like the 2000s, they tore it, like they moved it into like the one of the geez, I don't know what's the equivalent for country club in a city. A gentleman's club? I don't know. Yeah, they moved into a gentleman's club. um, you know, the people that feed the pigs. And then the city government put up a new statue. This time it was better, but it was still just ridiculous because they said that it says, for all the people of Illinois who fought for, I think, like peace, liberty, and like justice, which is just like bullshit. Like, we know you didn't do that in Haymarket. And yeah, another thing, so like a direct consequence of um the free speech fight. And I mean, free speech fight is more relevant for San Diego, but like most cities had the same thing, which is like I mean, rich people started to realize that, like if you put all these workers in downtown in one area, it's very easy for them to organize. So I mean, they started like planning out a lot of like more spread out, more sprawl, that made it very hard to organize.
Bill, thank you for sharing that. Just so I get this right, so the statue that was originally made in Chicago to commemorate the Haymarket riots was of the police?
Yeah.
Wow.
Look, I
And
mean,
not
I
like the
mean,
union organizers that were killed?
yeah, or just even like people who died or injured at the
Right,
fair.
right.
Like, I mean, CPD, like I always say that CPD is Chicago Police Department is like the luckiest PD in the United States, because no matter how bad they are, they always have NYPD and LAPD to cover the ass. Like, no matter how horrible they are, they can never be as horrible as NYPD and LAPD from a media perspective.
Right. Yeah. 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 It makes me think about how the truth is often flipped, right? Like kind of like gaslighting, right? Commemorating the police officer who murdered rather than those who were murdered. Um, um, And I think that's what resonated with me about this quote here about Elon Musk, like, or just, free speech or lack thereof on Twitter/X, that your freedom of speech is only protected when it aligns with the ruling party. Like the contradictions of meaning, right? Like the way truth gets distorted. Yeah. Any thoughts on this or anything that's been said?
I'm on Stack.
Yes, please, Chris.
Yeah. So yeah, I really liked how you pointed out at the end of the questions, kind of the historical through line of all of these things to present day. Just like, I think it's funny how X or Twitter has been compared to like, an internet version of a town square, and there being like suppression of, leftist speech. And, in San Diego, there was like a literal ban on what is it, soapbox row. And the other thing that was just interesting is, vigilantes who carry water for the capitalist class. Kind of brings me back to, I think it was, I forgot which of the protests it was during, but there's a lot of people just standing blocking roads. And my friend's dad, who, lives in San Diego, was like, hardcore Republicans, like I would just run those people over, or like, people being jerks at the Mercedes-Benz protest, where we're out on the picket line, just like people who are just completely hostile towards labor and their own class interests. It kind of just carries over today. And then the one thing I did also want to point out that stood out to me the most is just about the media editorializing against the protesters and their tactics. When I went through my first contract fight with the county in 2015, the board was Republicans and they were just being complete jerks. And the way the media was portraying it was making it sound like we were the ones who were being unreasonable. Like they wouldn't even let us have a lawyer at the discussions. Like they just had to have the stewards. And like we're the second lowest paid county in the state. And we're just, like, obviously we don't have the second lowest cost of living. And it was just completely one-sided and just really, it really opened my eyes about the media. And yeah, it's nothing's changed in the last 100 years.
Wow, thank you so much, Chris. Scott and then Taylor.
Yeah, thank you. The whole idea of Chris and Julie, I think both bringing up the free speech issue and how it's so years ago, I just remember these incredibly these Republicans. I had to deal with all these young Republicans in college, and they were pretty shocking to me. I didn't know that many before I went, and they just wanted to say anything they wanted to say. I just called them the sexist, racist, homophobes, because that's basically who they were. And they would just say the worst and most horrible things because they just got a like huge charge out of it. It was fun for them. I mean, it was never funny, but it was like they got some power out of it. And then you'd say something, you say, "Hey, that's not very nice," and then they would say, basically, "Fuck them if they can't take a joke," right? And I feel like it's the same thing with this whole idea of anti-woke and like we're being canceled. What they're really saying is that they want to say terrible things about people. They want to say horrible, mean, cruel things about anyone. Ultimately, because that's how they feel inside, and they want those. And so the free speech is, they're just coming clean with it now. Is that was just, they wanted to say, they never wanted to be shut up about anything mean and cruel. But as soon as they got the opportunity to shut somebody else down they didn't like, or they wanted to take the power from, they would immediately do that. And that's exactly what you see with someone like Elon Musk, right? He wants to say and think terrible, horrible white supremacist things, and he doesn't want anyone telling him not to. So now he gets his chance. And it's all tied together with their sense of entitlement and power and capitalism. So anyway, I thought that was a really, really poignant, it just keeps, this theme just keeps on going.
I was muted, but I was just like, like absolutely. With what Scott said and with what Chris said, like the kind of violent speech, like hateful speech, cruel speech, like insults, people being jerks, saying the sexist, racist, homophobic things. It makes me think about, this is kind of random, but it makes me think about how psychologists say that verbal abuse, I mean, this is not, of course, to reduce or dismiss physical violence, but psychology research has shown that verbal abuse has kind of longer term impact than physical. And so I just want to say, I think all of these things accumulate. When there's all these jerks, right, that accumulates. Okay, Taylor.
Yeah, can everybody hear me? I'm on my phone right now, so it's like
Yes,
funny.
we can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, just want to say again, thanks, Eric, for the presentation. I think the idea of approaching local history is pretty awesome because it's something that we all share in common, and it's stuff that we often don't know about. Like Eric mentioned that he didn't even know about this until he looked at that book, Under the Perfect Sun. So I think the local history thing is very cool. I have that book. I checked it out from the library like a week or two ago. I've only read through or looked at it once so far, but we'll do that soon again. And then another thing that's I forget who was saying, making the connection between like Houston, Phoenix, etc. But I read a really great book that's called From Bible Belt to Sun Belt, and it looks at the migration patterns of white Americans mostly. And Southern California was populated mostly by people from the Bible Belt. And so I've noticed, I also lived in Santa Cruz, but if you go in Northern California, like Union density in particular is much stronger. Whereas in Southern California, it's much weaker. I mean, I think LA is maybe a little bit stronger of a union town than San Diego, but and I think for a long time, Southern California had voted mostly Republican. If I'm not mistaken, San Diego itself was the largest city with a Republican mayor up until just a few years ago. But yeah, so I think the comparison between Houston and Phoenix with San Diego is actually a pretty apt one. And yeah, it's definitely something to know about our town is that it hasn't been a stronghold of leftist politics, and for reasons, because of things like the 1912 free speech fight. And so it's good to hear that stuff. I was telling Eric also that it might be interesting to turn this into kind of some kind of a walking tour. Yeah, because I think it might be attractive to people, and then just to tell them, yeah, we used to have a Chinatown, but then our government destroyed it. I think that's even like the right-wing talking point of being anti-government, I think, is stolen from the left. And because in reality, like, the right wing has always been very pro-government, they're anti-community, while I think the left has been anti-government but pro-community. So anyways, thank you for the presentation, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Taylor. That helped me understand. I mean, that context was really helpful. The Bible Belt to the Golden
Sun Belt. Sun Belt is what but from
right.
Bible Belt to Sun Belt, because the southern half of the United States tends to get more sun, but
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you join us for when we do have a discussion of Under the Perfect Sun. I have my library copy too.
Yes, I definitely will.
Yeah. Eric.
Hey, I just the walking tour idea is pretty cool. I'm not able to walk very far due to things, but I still think, like I said towards the end, like the idea of a vigil, like on January 6th down at 5th and E at Soapbox Row, or some kind of annual thing, like an annual presentation or something that our chapter at least can do, could be something that we you know, we could keep going to keep the memory alive. Also, I'm very interested in Phoenix now. I'm from New Jersey, so I hadn't really thought about Phoenix or Houston and how they were built. And I had another thought, but it's I get lost. So we got like 9 minutes left. So please continue.
Heather, please.
Hi, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Scott was saying about the hateful speech. It's interesting, there's this dichotomy that we seem to be seeing now with, you know, the government trying to shut down speech of the people who are simply trying to, you know, protest for their rights or protest for better working conditions. And then at the same time, we have like these crazy right wingers with their hate speech and wanting to have their free speech too. And I don't know if anyone has seen the news recently, but I believe it was last Monday, San Diego City Council meeting got Zoom bombed basically by a bunch of crazy racists. And you can actually watch the video of the meeting. So people were calling in with all this anti-Semitic commentary, racist against Black people, all this kind of thing going on. And so there was a kind of a struggle because it's a government meeting, it's a public meeting. So they can't stop them from speaking until it reaches a certain level of hate speech. And it looks like the only thing that they have at their disposal to get away with it without incurring a lawsuit for preventing people from speaking is to mute them and tell them that the topic of conversation isn't city business. It's not the business that they're working on. So it's not relevant. So they're able to mute them. But it was really rather interesting to watch Monica Montgomery Steppe have to handle listening to all of these hateful comments about her. Not just critical about her role, but racist, hateful comments about her personally. And having to sit there and listen to this, knowing that she has to let them speak, at least up until a certain point. So it's kind of crazy that this is the place that we're in, that the people are out there that are fighting for good are the ones who are getting shut down. And the ones that are out there with all this hate speech, we don't have the ability to shut them up.
Chris?
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that just because I mean, it's affecting other levels of government too. I was listening to NPR today and they were talking about how there's like a sharp increase in the amount of county clerks that are going to be new to their jobs for this election than like the ones prior. Is like some 40% are going to be new in certain states because they've just had enough of like having to deal with nonstop conspiracy theories that they can't disprove no matter how many facts you try to debunk it with, and threats and stuff like that. And the thing is, when you are a public official like that, you literally can't, you know, you have to be accessible for your constituents to talk to you. It's kind of just something that can be abused in the way that they've been doing it. Like you can't hide your email or whatever. Like people have to be able to talk to you, and it's been traumatizing to a lot of these people, and they don't want to be, you know, in these positions anymore, which are really important. And, you know, it's good to have people who are experienced. You know, newer people make more mistakes, and, you know, who knows who they're going to replace them with. And it's just really interesting because I watched the city council meetings for Chula Vista, and there's just this guy who will use literally everything that's open for public comment to attack this one city council member, which, you know, I'm sure he has some valid criticisms, but it's really ridiculous. Like if anyone ever wants to tune in on a Tuesday or Wednesday, it's really interesting. And they have to like cut him off and be like, you need to have your comments be like relevant towards what we're being discussed. And then he'll try to like tie it back in some oblique way. And it's just really interesting to see how people you know, abuse free speech for these really ridiculous reasons.
So in these spaces, there's no like guideline or some rule saying no hate speech.
It never reaches the level of hate speech with the city council meetings, but it does get to the point of like irrelevance that it's really just like disruptive. And they can't really cut him off until like it's gotten to that point where it's like, okay, we really have to shut this guy up. But it's literally every single thing that you can talk about, he will have a comment to bash on these people.
Right. I think Eric, as our last comment before we wrap up.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say that throughout this, thank you for everybody for watching the presentation and my thoughts while I was doing it were like, why is like nobody have their video on and nobody's showing their faces? And I remembered there was a announcement at the beginning that is being recorded and it's probably a good idea to, considering the hate speech that we might be getting. And so I figured I didn't even occur to me. Maybe I could have done the whole presentation without my face showing, but it's too late now. And so I don't know. I thought that was kind of a funny observation, but anyway, thank you everybody. And I guess Heather, or I'm not sure who's going to close out now, but somebody is. It's not me. Thank you everybody. Oh, okay. Oh, so somebody hasn't showered. That's cool. But you got lucky. So
It's all
now
good.
the hate speakers who might be watching won't see you. So anyway, thank you
I
everybody.
think Heather's gonna wrap us up.
Yeah, if there's no more questions, does anybody have any final questions before we wrap this up? Can't smell through the Zoom.
I just want to say really well done. You guys did a really good job.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
thank you, Eric. And thank you,
Eric.
Julie, for handling the Q&A. That was an awesome presentation. And thank everybody else. Thank you all for coming and thank you for your participation. We're going to be sending out an email to all of you in the next week or so, depending on how quickly we can get this together, with links to all of the sources that we used in the presentation and more information on the topic. So keep an eye on your email inbox for that. If you are a DSA member and would like to be involved in creating these types of informational sessions with us, please join the Com-Education channel in Slack. We'll be happy to have you there. If you're not on Slack, you may submit your information via the bit.ly link that you see on your screen right now, and one of us will follow up with you. And if we have no further questions or comments, this concludes our DSA Night School session for September 2023. Thanks, everybody, and have a great night.